The Iron Widow was bleeding into space. That was the first thing Navigator Priya Daeze saw when she pulled herself back to her station. The ship's coolant lines had ruptured along the port hull, and the blue-white fluid was venting out into the vacuum in long, slow ribbons that caught the distant starlight and scattered it like broken glass. Beautiful, in the way that only truly dangerous things can be beautiful. "Report," said Commander Yara Ose. Her voice was flat, not calm, just flat, the way a table is flat, unresponsive to whatever you place on it. Priya read the numbers and wished she hadn't. Hull integrity at 31%. Reactors 2 and 3 are offline. Reactor 1 is running on backup coils and Chen says it could drop at any moment. Main weapons are dead. Point defense is down to 4 turrets, 2 of which are jammed and will not rotate. Life support is holding, but we have a 17% oxygen leak in sections C through F. She stopped, and we lost the Alderman. Nobody spoke after that. The Alderman had been the Iron Widow's escort frigate for 11 years. It was a good ship. Small and fast, crewed by people who laughed too loud at bad jokes. When the Veth ambush came screaming out of the debris field, the Alderman had thrown itself into the path of 3 kinetic kill vehicles that were aimed directly at the Widow's bridge. It had bought them 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds were the reason Yara Ose was still alive to hear bad news. "Casualties," she said, 48 dead, 61 wounded. We started with a full crew of 212. Priya did the math that nobody wanted to hear. "We are at roughly 52% personnel capacity, and that includes Petty Officer Rukov, who has a broken arm and claims he is fine." "He is not fine," said Petty Officer Dmitry Volkov from across the bridge. His left arm was wrapped in a splint made from a coolant pipe casing and a strip torn from his own uniform. "But I am fine." Yara looked at him for exactly 1 second, then she looked away. That was all the argument she had energy for. The Iron Widow drifted. She was old, as human warships went. 83 years old, which in the context of interstellar military history was practically a relic. She had been built at the Callisto shipyards back when humanity was still learning how to fight properly in a vacuum, back when the alien empires of the Outer Reach were still chuckling to themselves about the species that had stumbled out of its home system with fire in its eyes and absolutely no idea what it was walking into. They had stopped chuckling sometime around her 4th deployment. Her official name in the Naval Registry was Unsk Vessel 0441 Acheron. Nobody called her that. The name Iron Widow had come from her 3rd deployment, during the counter-offensive at the Reach of Sorrows. 7 enemy ships had come for her that day. 7 ships sent specifically to kill her, because the enemy at the time, the Wrath Consolidation, now a thin entry in history databases, had believed she was the weakest target in the human formation. She was not the weakest target. The crews of all 7 ships never came home. The Iron Widow came home with a hole in her side large enough to park a shuttle in, her engines running on prayers and engineering tape, her crew bloody and exhausted and completely unwilling to lie down. The name stuck after that. Enemies had tried to kill her 14 times across 83 years. 14 times they had filed confident reports stating she was finished. 14 times they had been wrong. The reports were now collected and distributed in human military academies as a case study in what the instructors called aggressive optimism about outcomes. But right now, looking at the numbers on her screen, Priya was having a hard time seeing how the 15th time would be different. "How far to the nearest relay station?" Yara asked. "At our current drift rate, 9 days. If we can stabilize Reactor 1 and bring maneuvering thrusters back online, possibly 4. Can we send a distress signal?" Priya ran the numbers twice, because the first answer was one she did not want to give. "Yes, but it will be weak. At our current transmission capacity, it will take 16 hours to reach the nearest outpost at Relay Station Kadir." Yara nodded slowly. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips. Her crew knew that gesture well. It meant she was building something in her head, an architecture of intent, a structure of possibility assembled from the broken pieces in front of her. They had all learned over the years not to interrupt it. "Send the signal," she said. "Standard encryption. Include the full damage assessment." "Yes, Commander." The signal went out. Small and honest and patient, carrying its terrible numbers outward into the dark at the speed of light, hoping something friendly would be listening. 3 light hours away, something heard it. It was not friendly. The Veth did not have a word for opportunity the way humans used it. Their nearest equivalent translated roughly as the moment when an enemy's wound becomes your doorway. It was a concept so deeply built into their language that Veth children learned it before they learned to count. It described not just a tactical moment, but a moral one, the idea that an enemy's weakness was not to be pitied but to be entered. Fleet Commander Orthvan understood this concept better than most. He was old by Veth standards. His carapace had shifted from deep amber to the pale gold that came with age, and the sensory filaments along his cranial ridge had thickened into something that younger officers sometimes described, behind his back, as decorative. He had commanded Veth warships for 40 years. He had fought humans on 3 separate occasions, which was 2 more times than most of his colleagues, and he had come away from those engagements with a deep and somewhat inconvenient respect for the species and a very strong preference for never engaging them again unless the numbers were overwhelmingly in his favor. Right now, the numbers were overwhelmingly in his favor. The intercepted signal was unambiguous. The Iron Widow, and yes, even the Veth called it that, because the name appeared as a warning marker in intelligence files across 14 alien governments, was crippled. 31% hull integrity. 2 reactors down, main weapons offline, life support struggling. The ship was bleeding oxygen and coolant into the void in measurable, consistent, unfakeable quantities. His own ships were at full strength. 3 heavy cruisers and the dreadnought Undying Certainty behind him, Veth's newest and most powerful warship, built specifically using decades of data on human combat methodology. He stared at the signal readouts for a long time. The part of him that had survived 40 years of war, the cautious, skeptical, slightly paranoid part, kept generating the same quiet alarm humans like traps. They built them the way other species built houses, with care and creativity and a disconcerting enthusiasm. There was a phrase that had been translated into 17 alien languages from the original human English. If it seems too easy, a human built it, but the data was too thorough to fabricate. Reactor oscillation signatures, atmosphere bleed rates, hull stress patterns, these were not things you could fake at this level of physical consistency. The Iron Widow was genuinely dying. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Verathan, who had never faced humans in combat, and therefore still had the luxury of excitement, stepped closer. The High Command directive is clear. If we can take the Iron Widow or confirm its destruction on our terms, the political impact, I know what it is, Orthvan said. He kept staring at the screen. He thought about the 3 times he had fought humans. The first time had been at Meridian Crossing, where a human ship with a destroyed engine had turned sideways and used its own hull as a shield and a battering ram simultaneously and taken out 2 of his escort vessels before finally going dark. The second time had been at the edge of the Ashfall Nebula, where a crew of 40 people on a ship rated for 120 had held a defensive position for 9 hours against 6 attackers, and only stopped when every one of them was dead. Not a single one had surrendered, not even when surrender had been offered, not even at the very end. The third time, the humans had won outright, and he had retreated and spent 3 months trying to understand what they had done differently, and he was still not entirely certain. He had fought humans 3 times. He knew better than to be comfortable, and yet, the Iron Widow's signal sat there in his display, patient and honest and damning. 31% hull integrity. Dead weapons. Bleeding into space. Prepare the broadcast, he said. Full transmission. Human space frequencies. Verathan's filaments lit up with what translated roughly as excitement and anticipation, and the particular eagerness of someone who has never been burned. The full surrender demand? Broadcast to all of human space? To all of human space, Orthvan confirmed. The Iron Widow is the most recognized warship the humans have. If we are seen to stand over her, demand their surrender in the shadow of their most famous vessel, it changes what this war means. It changes what they believe they are. The political value was enormous, beyond military victory. The Iron Widow was a symbol, proof, to humans and aliens alike, that the species could be beaten bloody and still come back, still come home. That something could take everything the universe threw at it and refuse to go down. If that symbol fell while the Veth stood over it, broadcasting a demand to human space, it would rupture something fundamental in human morale. He told himself that was why he was doing this. He set the intercept course. In the Iron Widow's engineering corridor, Lieutenant Chen Fang was not sleeping. She was not sleeping in a very specific and intentional way, surrounded by the disassembled guts of the ship's primary power relay system, which she had pulled out of the wall and spread across the floor around her in a pattern that probably made sense to her and looked to everyone else like a disaster with ambitions. She was 26 years old. She had graduated from the Lunar Academy of Systems Engineering at 19, which was unusual enough that both her instructors and her peers had checked her credentials twice. She was very good at exactly 3 things: fixing engines in ways the manuals did not describe, eating protein bars without tasting them, and finding solutions to problems that everyone else had already called impossible. Right now, she was working on the third thing, Chen. Petty Officer Volkov's voice came through the comm. He was somewhere above her in the secondary junction room, reading power output figures and relaying them down. "Talk to me." "Still here," she said. "What are we actually looking at?" She sat back on her heels and looked at the components arranged around her on the floor. Reactor 1 was not dying. That was the thing none of the readouts upstairs had captured properly. Reactor 1 was doing something more interesting than dying. It was oscillating, cycling in rapid, irregular pulses between states of near shutdown and sudden sharp surges, like a heartbeat with a bad arrhythmia. Unstable, undoubtedly, dangerous, absolutely, but not dead. And an oscillating reactor, if you were careful enough and creative enough, and maybe slightly divorced from conventional engineering wisdom, could be tuned. The oscillations could be shaped. The surges could be directed. It was not something the reactor was designed to do. It was not something any engine manual in existence would describe as a viable approach. It was also, as far as Chen could tell, the only option they had. "We have power," she said, "not normal power. Not the power we're supposed to have. Different power. Word or power." She picked up a coupling interface and turned it over in her hands. "But power, how long do you need?" "4 hours. Maybe 3 if Volkov stops talking to me." "I heard that," Volkov said. "Good," Chen said. She pressed the coupling into place and the reactor hiccuped, then steadied, then pulsed again with something that felt, even through the deck plating, like readiness. Chen smiled. Above her, the Iron Widow drifted in her cooling ribbons of leaked fluid, patient and still, carrying her wounds through the dark. The distress signal moved outward, 16 hours from the nearest human ears. 3 light hours away, the Veth fleet accelerated, their weapons charged, their commander certain of the math, his certainty growing with each hour of closed distance. He had looked at the numbers 100 times, and they always said the same thing. The Iron Widow was finished. Nobody had told him about Chen. Yara Osi sat in the command chair and did not move. The bridge was quiet in that layered way that large damaged machines are quiet. The far hiss of a compromised seal in the ventilation, the soft, intermittent tone of a sensor suite on reserve power, the distant rhythm of Volkov's boots on the deck above as he moved between the junction room and the secondary corridor. The widow breathed these sounds the way a very old person breathes in sleep, slow and irregular and stubbornly ongoing. Yara had been on this ship for 19 years. She knew the sound of every section, the particular rhythm of every junction, the specific vibration frequencies of every stress structural member. She knew that Reactor 2 smelled different from Reactor 3. A subtle difference in the chemistry of their cooling systems that had never been corrected despite 3 maintenance cycles. She knew that the observation deck on the port side had a specific harmonic at night cycle that nobody had ever explained. She knew that the mess hall on Deck 7 made a sound at A300 hours that was either a settling support beam or a ghost, and that the crew had strong opinions in both directions. She knew this ship, and she knew the difference between dying and hurt. The Iron Widow was hurt. There was a distance between those 2 words that she intended, very deliberately, to make matter. "Commander." Priya's voice arrived with the careful weight of someone carrying something they did not want to drop. Sensors just picked up drive signatures, about 3 light hours out, moving toward us. Yara did not move. "How many?" 4 ships, running identification. A pause that went a beat too long. Veth markings. 3 heavy cruisers, and the pause came back, heavier this time. 1 Veth dreadnought. Designation, the Undying Certainty. The bridge absorbed that information in silence. The Undying Certainty was not merely a warship. It was the warship, the newest and most dangerous vessel in the Veth fleet, designed from its keel outward using decades of accumulated data on human combat tactics and human ship design. It had never been in a real battle. It had been built for exactly this kind of moment, the killing of something already dying. Yara pressed 2 fingers to her lips. "Time to intercept?" she asked. "At their current velocity, 6 hours, 6 hours." She sat with that number and felt its weight and looked at it from every angle she had. "Get me Chen," she said. The comm clicked. A pause. Then Chen's voice, distracted, halfway through a thought that was clearly going somewhere else. "I'm busy, I know." "How long?" 4 hours, maybe less if the oscillation holds. Yara looked at the sensor display. 4 Veth ships moving through the dark toward a ship that every readout in the galaxy said was finished. "You have 4, she said. "Do it in 3. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Chen said quietly and with total certainty, "Yes, Commander." The comm closed. The Iron Widow drifted. Outside, the coolant ribbons turned slowly in the dark, catching starlight, scattering it in pale cold arcs. Beautiful, the way dangerous things are beautiful. Patient, the way old things are patient. Waiting. The broadcast hit human space like a stone dropped into still water. It went out on all frequencies, translated into 6 languages simultaneously, and it came with a visual component that the Veth had clearly spent some time preparing. Footage of the Iron Widow drifting, still leaking coolant, her port hull dark and silent, surrounded at a careful distance by 4 Veth ships arranged in a formation that communicated, without any words required, total and comfortable dominance. The Veth knew how to communicate. They had been doing interstellar politics for 400 years before humans left their home system. They understood that the visual content of a message often mattered more than its words. The words in the standard translation that reached Earth's monitoring stations about 5 hours after transmission. You know this ship. Everyone in this region of space knows this ship. Today it is dying. Today we stand over it. We offer humanity one choice: formal surrender of all human military operations in the outer reach sectors, acknowledgement of Veth territorial claims in the Ashfall and Meridian systems, and the peaceful decommissioning of your forward fleet within 60 days. In exchange, the crew of the Iron Widow will be taken as prisoners of war and treated according to the conventions of civilized engagement. Refuse, and we will finish what your own battle damage started. You have 6 hours. We will be listening, that was the message. 6 hours. The Veth fleet sat around the Iron Widow and waited. The message reached Relay Station Kadir first, which was exactly the kind of irony the universe seemed to enjoy, because Kadir was the same relay station that the Iron Widow's distress signal was currently crawling toward at the speed of electromagnetic radiation. The two signals were, in a sense, running in opposite directions on the same road, one asking for help, one announcing that help was no longer the point. Station Commander Aditi Nair read the Veth broadcast 3 times. Then she pulled up a star map, confirmed the coordinates, and sent an emergency priority burst to Earth's Naval High Command with a message that contained, in its entirety, only 3 lines. Veth fleet at coordinates attached. Iron Widow confirmed at location. They are broadcasting surrender demand to all of human space. Awaiting orders, she did not add her own assessment. She did not need to. The facts spoke for themselves loudly and without comfort. The reply from Naval High Command came 47 minutes later, fast for interstellar communication, which told Nair something about how many people at High Command were currently awake and looking at the same star map she was. The reply said, acknowledged. No military assets within response range and time. Forward any communication from the Iron Widow directly. Maintain monitoring. Nair read that twice as well. Then she did something that was not in her orders. She opened a direct tight beam channel aimed at the Iron Widow's last known position, encoded it with the personal authorization she was not strictly supposed to use for this kind of message, and sent the following. Commander Osei, we heard your distress signal. We also heard them. Nothing is close enough. I am sorry. Whatever you decide, we are listening. Earth is listening. All of us. She sent it, and then sat back and felt the particular helplessness of being very far from something you cannot change. Aboard the Iron Widow, the Veth broadcast arrived about 20 minutes after the fleet did. Yara heard it on the bridge speakers, translated live by the ship's communication system in a flat, mechanical voice that somehow made it worse. The flatness removed any emotional color, left only the clean shape of what was being said. You have 6 hours. We will be listening. The bridge was very still when it finished. Yara did not move from the command chair. She had not moved from it in 3 hours. Her neck ached. She did not mention this. They are transmitting to all of human space, Priya said quietly. She did not say it as information. Yara knew it was information. She said it the way you say something when you need to hear yourself acknowledge its weight out loud. Yes, Yara said. Earth will hear this. Yes. Every station, every outpost, every human ship in the outer reach, Priya. Not harsh, just complete. Priya stopped talking. Yara pressed 2 fingers to her lips and sat with the calculation. She ran it in her head the way she had been running it since the Veth signatures first appeared on sensor. Not searching for an answer she didn't have, but checking that she had found all the answers she did have and understood what they added up to. There was no relief force. The nearest human military assets capable of engaging a Veth fleet of this size were approximately 11 hours away at emergency speed, which was 5 hours past the Veth deadline. The math on that was unambiguous. There was no surrender option she would take. The outer reach territories covered 17 human colony systems. 60 million people had built lives in those systems. The Ashfall and Meridian claims alone would cut human supply lines in half. Surrender was not an option she would take. She had not needed to think about that part for very long. That left the third thing. She pressed her comm. Chen, still here, update. A pause. The sound of something being torqued into place. Oscillation is holding steady at a rate I can work with. I have redesigned the power distribution pathway through 3 sections. When I flip the main coupling over to the tune cycle, another sound, something settling. It will not look like anything the ship's systems were designed to do. The output readings will be wrong by the standards of the original engineering, but it will work. Will it hold under sustained fire? The pause this time was longer. For a while, Chen said. Define sustained. Yara decided she could work with that answer. Keep going. You have 2 hours. The comm closed. Dmitry Volkov appeared at Yara's elbow from wherever he had been, carrying 2 cups of the dark, bitter, slightly scorched thing the ship's galley produced when asked for coffee and ignoring the question entirely. He set 1 cup down next to her right hand without comment. His splinted arm was held close to his side in a posture of determined competence. They are watching us on sensors, he said. He wasn't asking. Yes. So they know we are not moving. They know our power readings are low. They think we are exactly what we look like. He drank from his cup. They think this is already done. Yara picked up the cup and held it without drinking. What do you think? Volkov was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sensor display, at the 4 Veth ships arrayed around them like 4 walls of a room they had built and locked from outside. I think, he said slowly, that they have never made the mistake of winning before they have won. They have never sat in a room with us when we are like this. He gestured vaguely with his good hand. A gesture that encompassed the damaged bridge, the blood still on the floor near the navigation console that nobody had cleaned yet, the dark spaces where screens had gone out and not come back. They see broken things and they believe the breaking is finished. They do not understand. What don't they understand? He picked up his cup again. That we break differently. Yara finally drank her coffee. It was terrible. It was also hot and it was present, and sometimes that was what mattered. 5 light minutes away, Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn stood at his display and watched the Iron Widow's sensor returns with the patience of someone who was reasonably certain the outcome was decided. His caution had not entirely gone to sleep. It was still there, running quietly in the background like a program he could not close. But the data kept confirming itself. The ship was not warming weapons, was not generating thrust, was not showing any of the power-up signatures that preceded combat activity. Her reactors were still fluctuating. Her hull was still breached. She was dark in all the ways that mattered. Still no response to the broadcast, Varison reported. No. Do you expect one? Orith Vaughn thought about that. Did humans typically respond to surrender demands? His experience suggested they sometimes did and sometimes did not, and that the silence was not always what it appeared. At Meridian Crossing, a human ship had gone completely silent for 40 minutes before its crew somehow got its destroyed engine partially functional again and rammed them. At the Ashfall engagement, a human commander had responded to a surrender demand with a 3-word transmission that, when translated, apparently meant something close to "not today, friend," which Orith Vaughn had found oddly respectful in retrospect. I expect them to do something I have not predicted, he said. I am simply hoping the something they do is not enough. Varison's filaments flickered. With respect, Commander, what could they do? Their main weapons are offline. Their primary reactor is failing. They are operating at half crew capacity against 4 ships in full combat readiness. The mathematics. Orith Vaughn said have not finished being written. He kept watching. Back on the Iron Widow, Priya picked up the tight beam message from Relay Station Kadir. She read it once. She printed it on a small physical card, one of the old-style cards the ship still kept in a drawer on the bridge for situations where screens were unreliable, and she walked to the command chair and placed it on the armrest beside Yara's hand. Yara looked at it. Commander Osi, we heard your distress signal. We also heard them. Nothing is close enough. I am sorry. Whatever you decide, we are listening. Earth is listening. All of us. She read it twice. She folded it carefully and put it in the left breast pocket of her uniform against her chest. She did not say anything about it. Her crew did not ask. Battle stations, she said. Priya looked up from her console. Commander? Quiet ones, Yara said. No active systems. No power signatures. Nobody moves faster than they need to. We are a dying ship. She paused. Until we are not. The crew moved quietly, with the particular efficiency of people who had been on this ship long enough to know how to be useful without being told exactly how. Weapons Officer Torres, who had a gash along her jaw from flying console debris, pulled herself to her station and began working through the manual override sequences for the point defense turrets, the ones that still responded. 2 of them were jammed solid. 2 of them might still turn. Structural Officer Park moved through the forward sections, checking seal integrity on the compartments that still held pressure, closing off the ones that didn't. If the ship took more hull damage, they needed to know which sections could still be saved and which ones to seal and forget. Volkov went back up to the junction room and sat down next to his relay board with his broken arm and his bad coffee and began running through every power pathway Chen had not yet rebuilt, looking for anything that still worked and hadn't been noticed. The Iron Widow went through her preparations in silence. The Veth sensors watched her sit quiet and still and broken. 3 hours and 41 minutes remained on their deadline. Far away, on dozens of stations and ships and colony outposts scattered across the human outer reach, people sat in front of screens and listened to the Veth broadcast and looked at the footage of the Iron Widow drifting in her coolant ribbons. Not all of them knew the ship's history. Some of the younger colonists, the ones born out here in the Reach who had never seen Earth or the inner systems, knew the Iron Widow only as a name. Something the older people said with a specific quality of voice, a weight that younger people recognized as meaning, "This matters, this is one of the things we keep." But all of them knew what the moment meant. The Veth had made sure of that. The broadcast had been designed to be understood even by people who didn't know the details. A dying ship surrounded, a clock running. In the colony on Kareth Station, a man who had never met any of the Iron Widow's crew and never would sat in front of his screen and did not go to bed when his shift ended. He stayed. He did not know why exactly. He just did not want to stop watching. In the Meridian system, at the edge of the territory, the Veth had just claimed as their price for the Widow's crew. A woman who had lived her entire life in that system put her children to bed and came back to her screen and sat there with her hands folded. In a dozen places, in 100 different rooms, people watched the screen and said nothing and waited. The Iron Widow sat in the dark surrounded by ships that were certain she was finished. 2 hours and 50 minutes on the clock. In the engineering corridor, Chen Fang touched a coupling she had modified 3 times and felt it seat differently this time. Felt the resistance give in a specific way that she recognized as correct in the deep mechanical intuition that great engineers develop and cannot fully explain. There, she said to no one and everyone. The reactor pulsed, not the weak, irregular oscillation of a failing system, not the arrhythmic stumbling of something trying to die. This was something else, a deep, rhythmic surge that moved through the deck plating under her boots like a heartbeat finding its way back. She reached for her comm. "Commander," she said, "I need you to hear something." Yara listened. The reactor pulsed again, and again, each beat a little more certain than the last. "That," Yara said quietly. "Yes," Chen said. "How long?" "Give me 90 minutes." Yara looked at the clock. 2 hours and 48 minutes remaining. "You have them," she said. She set the card in her pocket more securely against her chest, the one that said Earth is listening, and she started building the final architecture. The 90 minutes had a shape to them. Not the shapeless crawl of waiting, not the stretched blankness of boredom. These 90 minutes had architecture. They were divided by tasks and checkpoints and the steady mechanical language of a crew doing the specific things that needed doing, organized around a center of purpose that nobody had announced out loud, but everyone had understood from the moment Yara said, "Quiet battle stations." Torres had the point defense turrets. 2 of the 4 were genuinely dead. Their rotation mechanisms had been fused shut by the same kinetic impact that had taken out the port weapons array. But the other 2 responded to manual override, slowly and with protest, grinding through about 70% of their designed range before seizing up. 70% was better than 0. Torres noted their firing arcs on her display, mapped what they could cover, and built her mind around the geometry of the thing. What she could protect, what she would have to let go, where to focus if it came to it. Park had finished sealing the compromised sections. Sections C, D, and part of F were now isolated from the rest of the ship's atmosphere. He had also done something that was not in his assigned duties, but was very much in his character, which was to go through each accessible damaged section himself and make certain there was nobody still in them who could be moved. There was not. He knew there was not. The casualty count was accurate. He checked anyway. It was the kind of thoroughness that the Iron Widow seemed to cultivate in her crew over time. The understanding that the numbers on a screen were not the same thing as certainty. Volkov sat in the junction room with his broken arm and his relay board and found 17 power pathways that the partial outage had left in a state he described as sleeping, not dead. These were secondary circuits, minor conduits that had not been active before the battle because they had not been needed. They were not impressive by themselves, but 17 sleeping pathways, routed together through Chen's redesigned distribution system, added up to something worth having. He relayed this to Chen without comment. Chen added it to her architecture without thanks, which was not rudeness but efficiency, and which Volkov understood perfectly. The Iron Widow had a chapel. Not many human warships did anymore. It was a feature of an older design philosophy. The idea that people going into danger needed a room specifically for the kind of thinking that danger provoked. The chapels on newer ships had been redesigned into additional storage, into briefing rooms, into spaces with more immediately quantifiable utility. The Iron Widow still had hers. It was very small, barely enough room for 6 people, and the benches were metal, and the skull signal light source was an amber emergency strip that had been converted to permanent use so long ago that the original crew member who had done it was probably dead. It had no specific religious identity. It had a small table and a book of blank pages that crew members had been writing in for decades. The latest entries were near the end of the book. Earlier entries had gone from formal and careful to something more honest over the years. Shorter, more direct. The way people write when they have things to say and limited time to say them. Yara went there for 8 minutes. She did not read the book. She sat on the cold metal bench and looked at the amber light on the wall and held very still, and let herself feel the full weight of the situation without the managed composure she wore on the bridge. She felt it completely. The certainty that the next few hours would determine not just whether the crew of the Iron Widow lived or died, but whether the outer reach colonies behind them would fall under Veth territorial control whether 60 million people would spend the next generation negotiating from a position of profound weakness, whether the thing the Iron Widow represented, the stubborn, irrational, historically documented refusal to stay down, survived or ended here. She felt all of that. Then she stood up, straightened her uniform, and went back to the bridge. 8 minutes. She had been doing this her whole career. The discipline of it was not about suppressing the weight, it was about feeling it fully in a controlled space so it didn't bleed through at the wrong moment. Her crew did not know she went to the chapel, or, if they did, they had never mentioned it. The Iron Widow had its own understandings. 1 hour and 12 minutes before the Veth deadline, Priya caught something on the long-range sensors. Commander, she kept her voice level. Quantum entanglement burst from the direction of Kadir Relay. High-priority encoding. Yara looked up. Naval High Command pre-confirmed after a moment. The message was brief. The kind of brief that meant someone senior had written it, and then deleted everything except what absolutely needed to be there. Commander Osi, no relief within range. Your discretion on engagement. Naval record will reflect whatever decision you make as in the best interest of the service. High Command sends its respect. ADM Chen Wu, she read it on the small screen Priya brought to her chair. Then she looked at the sensor display showing the 4 Veth ships surrounding them. Then she looked around the bridge. Torres at weapons, Park at structural, Priya at navigation, 2 ensigns at secondary systems, Volkov's voice occasionally coming down from the junction room above. She had been given her discretion. It was the most tactful way she had ever been told that nobody was coming. Thank you, Priya, she said. She handed the screen back. Then she pressed the ship-wide comm. Not a combat alert, not an alarm, just the simple open channel that put her voice in every room of the Iron Widow that still had speakers running. This is the commander, she said. You have all heard the Veth broadcast. You know the numbers. I am not going to pretend the numbers are different from what they are. 4 of their ships to our 1 damaged ship is not a fair fight. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. We are not asking for a fair fight. We are asking for our fight. Chen is bringing the reactor back. Torres has point defense ready. Volkov has found power we did not know we had. Every one of you has been doing your job for the last 3 hours without being told how to do it, because you have been on this ship long enough to understand what this ship requires of you. She paused. The Veth have surrounded a dying ship and they are waiting for it to finish dying. We are going to explain to them as clearly as we can that they have misread the situation. She closed the comm. In the engineering corridor, Chen heard the commander's voice from the speaker above her head and felt something move in her chest that she did not pause to name. She picked up the final coupling, the one she had been building toward for 3 hours, the keystone of the whole redesigned system, and held it in both hands and looked at it for a moment. This was the piece. If this worked, the reactor would not just stabilize. It would do something that the Iron Widow's original designers had never intended, and would probably have strongly discouraged. It would cycle at the tuned oscillation frequency in a sustained loop that produced power output above the ship's rated maximum. Not a lot above, not safely above, not the kind of above that anyone would call a good idea, but enough. She seated the coupling. The reactor did not explode. This was the first good sign. It pulsed once, hard, and the vibration ran through the deck, plating under her boots and up through her legs. And she felt it in her spine like a struck bell. Then it pulsed again, smoother. Then again, finding its rhythm. Each pulse slightly more settled than the last. Volkov, she said into the comm. Reading it, he said immediately. He had been watching the output board. Tell me, power distribution is. A pause. She could hear him working the board with his one good hand. It is not what the manual says it should look like. It looks like something I would call wrong if I did not know you built it. Another pause, but it is climbing. It is stable. He stopped. What? It is enough, he said. There was something quiet in his voice. Something that was almost reverence. It is enough, Chen. She sat back against the corridor wall and looked at the reactor housing in front of her. The worn, ancient, scarred surface of a system that was 83 years old and had been repaired so many times that almost no original component remained. All of it replaced piece by piece over decades by engineers who had loved the ship enough to keep bringing her back. Of course it's enough, she said softly. It's her. 40 minutes before the deadline, the Veth sensors began showing something that Orith Vaughn's sensor officer reported with the specific, careful flatness of someone who wants to state a fact without speculating about what it means. Commander, the Iron Widow's reactor output reading has changed, or even turned. Changed how? It is steadier. The oscillation pattern we've been tracking has shifted. The arrhythmia is resolving. A silence. Resolving, Orith Van repeated. The readings are consistent with a power distribution restructuring. Something is being routed differently. The sensor officer's filaments were very still. I am not certain what to compare this to. I do not have a reference in the database for this pattern. Orith Von looked at the display for a long time. The cautious part of him, the part he had been keeping quiet for the last several hours, did not stay quiet anymore. Distance, he said. We are holding at 40,000 kilometers. Standard standoff for a disabled. Reduced to 30, he said, then reconsidered. No, hold distance. Weapons to active standby. Varathson stepped close. Commander, with respect, the deadline is 40 minutes away. If they are doing something with their power systems, it is likely survival activity. Repairing life support, maintaining hull pressure. Even if they restore full reactor function, their main weapons are offline, Orith Von said. According to the readings we have been given. A pause. You think the readings are wrong? He thought about the first time he fought humans. The ship with the destroyed engine. The ship that was supposed to be dead. I think, he said slowly, that the Iron Widow has been in 14 engagements that should have killed her and has survived all of them. I think the crew currently aboard is not a random collection of people. I think the commander of that ship is a woman who has been in this vessel for 19 years and has not in that time shown any particular inclination toward surrender. He kept watching the screen. And I think we are 40 minutes from a deadline and their reactor is stabilizing. Varathson said nothing. Full weapons hot, Orith Von said. All ships. Do not wait for the deadline. On the Iron Widow's bridge, a single tone from the sensor array. They are bringing weapons to full active status, Priya said. Her voice was level, very deliberately level. How long do we have? Yara asked. At their charge rate, maybe 8 minutes before they are at full combat readiness. 8 minutes before the deadline. They had noticed the reactor. Yara looked at the clock. She looked at the sensor display. She looked at her crew. Torres's jaw set hard over the weapons console. Park standing at structural with his hands behind his back. Priya watching her screen with the focused quiet of someone who has already decided they are not going anywhere. Chen, she said. Ready, Chen said. Volkov, ready, Volkov said. Torres. Torres looked over from weapons. Her eyes were steady. Ready, she said. Yara pulled in one slow breath, let it out. Bring her up, she said. And the Iron Widow woke. Not with a shout. With a deep, resonant hum that started somewhere in the engineering decks and moved upward through the hull in a wave, the kind of sound a ship makes when power comes back to systems that have been dark and waiting. Lights returned in sections that had been running on emergency strips. Screens came back online across the bridge. The deep, steady pulse of the tuned reactor moved through the deck, plating like a drum. Not the frantic arrhythmia of a dying system, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of something that had found its footing. She was not at full strength. She was nowhere near full strength. Her hull was still 31%. Her main weapons were still dark. Her crew was still half the size it should have been. But she was awake, and she was angry. On the undying certainty, every sensor array in the fleet lit up simultaneously. For 3 seconds, no one on the Veth dreadnought said anything at all. Then the sensor officer's voice came through with something in it that Orith Von had not heard in 40 years of commanding warships. A quality that existed just below professionalism, just below composure, the early, careful, controlled edge of fear. Commander, the Iron Widow is powering up. Orith Von stared at the display. The readings were wrong. Not wrong in the way of a sensor malfunction or a calibration error. Wrong in the way of a situation that had departed from all predicted parameters simultaneously. The power output coming from the Iron Widow did not match the profile of her known reactor specifications. It did not match any profile in the Veth database for a human ship of her class. It was not what a dying ship looked like. It was not what a repaired ship looked like. It was something he did not have a word for. How, Varison said. It was not a tactical question. It was just a question. Orith Von did not answer. He thought about the crew aboard that ship. The commander who had been on it for 19 years, the engineers and officers who had kept something 83 years old alive through 14 engagements that should have been the end of it. He thought about the concept his people called the moment when an enemy's wound becomes your doorway. He thought about what it meant that the wound was not what he had believed it was. He thought about everything he had learned in 40 years about humans, about the gap between what they looked like and what they were, about the specific and well-documented tendency of this species to be most dangerous precisely at the moment they appeared most finished. All weapons fire, he said. Now, everything we have. But the Iron Widow was already moving. She moved like something that had been pretending to be still. Not fast. The Iron Widow had never been a fast ship, and 83 years and 31% hull integrity had not improved that particular quality. But deliberate. The thrust that came from the maneuvering system was not the desperate, lurching output of a damaged drive fighting to function. It was controlled. Directed. The ship knew exactly where she was going, and she was going there without apology. Yara had the course already mapped when she gave the order to move. She had been building it in her head for the last 90 minutes, working from the sensor data on the Veth fleet's positions. their standoff distances, their formation geometry. The Veth had arranged their 4 ships in a pattern that made good sense if the Iron Widow was going to stay still and die. A perimeter formation, each ship positioned to fire on the target from a different angle, maximizing coverage, minimizing the target's ability to choose a direction that had fewer weapons pointed at it. The weakness in a perimeter formation was the space between the ships. Not the space between any 2 ships at random, the specific space between the heavy cruiser on the Widow's port side and the heavy cruiser on her forward port side, where the geometry of the formation created a corridor maybe 12,000 kilometers wide. Narrow, by deep space standards, wide enough. The Iron Widow turned her bow toward that corridor and accelerated. Firing solutions, Yara said. Torres's hands were already moving. Point defense is tracking the nearest cruiser. I have it at 68,000 kilometers and closing. I can put fire on it at 40,000. Hold for 30. 30,000, yes, Commander. The Veth fleet responded. They had to rotate to track the Widow's new heading, which took time, not much time, seconds of time, but the Iron Widow's entire strategy was built from seconds. The nearest heavy cruiser, the one Torres was watching, had to adjust its firing arc by almost 30 degrees to lead the Widow's new trajectory. While it was adjusting, it was not firing with full effectiveness. The other cruiser in the corridor was further away and rotating even harder. The dreadnought Undying Certainty was behind the Widow now, repositioning its enormous weapons banks swinging around on their mounts. Energy weapons from the Far Cruiser, Priya called. The ship shook. Not a hull breach, not this time, but something structural in the forward section groaned loudly enough to hear through the deck. Minor damage to forward shielding. We are still moving. Keep moving, Yara said. On the Undying Certainty, Orith Vaughn watched the Iron Widow drive itself into the gap between his 2 forward cruisers with something he would have called admiration if the circumstances had been different. It was not the action of a damaged ship running blindly for any available escape. It was precise. It was aimed at the exact point in his formation that created the most complications, close enough to the 2 forward cruisers that firing at the Widow risked hitting each other, angled such that the Dreadnought's main guns could not get a clean shot without one of his own ships in the potential fire path. She was using his formation against him. He had to break the formation. He sent the order to the forward cruisers to diverge, open the gap, give the Dreadnought a clear lane, except that the Widow would slip through rather than be destroyed at this range. She wants to get past us, Varison said. She wants to get close to us, Orith Van corrected. There is a difference. He understood it suddenly and completely. The Iron Widow's main weapons were offline. That was real. The readings had been accurate on that point. Her main weapons array, the forward-facing heavy guns that had destroyed 7 ships at the Reach of Sorrows, were genuinely dark. But close range was a different kind of fight. All ships pulled back from the Iron Widow fired. Not her main guns. Something else. The Iron Widow had things that did not appear prominently in her listed specifications because they had been added and modified and sometimes quietly reclassified over 83 years of upgrades, retrofits, and the kind of creative maintenance that long-serving engineering crews develop when they love their ship. One of these things was what the current crew called the Persuaders. Officially, they were listed in an old maintenance file as Close-Range Counterboarding Defense Systems version 3.1, a set of point-blank weapons emplacements originally designed to repel hostile boarding parties if an enemy ever got close enough to attempt a hull breach. They were old. They were short-range. They were not the kind of weapons anyone built a battle plan around. They were also on a completely separate power circuit from the main weapons array, a circuit that had been dark for years but was very much part of the 17 sleeping pathways Volkov had found and fed into Chen's redesigned distribution system. At 25,000 kilometers, inside the distance where the heavy cruiser's main guns could rotate fast enough to track effectively, Torres opened up with the Persuaders. They were not subtle weapons. They were designed for killing things at close range, and they were very good at that. 4 emplacements, rapid fire, targeting the cruiser's engine section with the specific geometry Torres had been computing since the moment Yara mapped the course. The cruiser shuddered, not destroyed, not even close to destroyed, but its engine output dropped sharply as the emplacements tore through the unarmored exhaust manifolds at the rear of its drive system. It stopped accelerating. Its firing solutions degraded as its attitude control struggled to compensate for uneven thrust. 31%, Torres called, reading the cruiser's new power output from the sensor returns. She looked up at Yara with something in her expression that was professional satisfaction, worn very thin over something rawer. It knows how that number feels. The Iron Widow did not slow down. She drove through the gap in the Veth formation at her best speed, which was not impressive in absolute terms, but was exactly sufficient for what it needed to do. And as she came out the other side, she rotated, a hard burn on the lateral thrusters, the kind of maneuver that the ship's autopilot would have refused on the grounds of structural risk, but that Yara was flying manually and accepted the refusal alert for without changing the input. The Iron Widow was now inside the Veth formation. Orith Vaughn had 30 years of combat experience, and it served him well for the next 6 minutes. He kept his composure. He kept issuing orders. He broke his formation correctly, pulling the crippled cruiser back and pushing the other two into flanking positions on either side of the Iron Widow's new heading, creating a crossfire situation that the human ship would have to escape from. He did all of this correctly. The problem was that the Iron Widow was also inside the minimum safe distance for the Dreadnought's main guns. This was the thing that Varison had not understood, and Orith Vaughn had only half understood until now. The Widow had never been trying to escape the formation. She had been trying to get inside it. Inside the perimeter, inside the standoff range, inside the geometry, where the largest and most powerful ship in the Veth fleet had to be very careful about what it fired at for fear of hitting its own vessels. The Iron Widow was not a fast ship, and she was not a powerful ship compared to what surrounded her right now, but she was an old ship, and old ships learn things. "Rotate the Dreadnought," Orith Vaughn said. "Get the main batteries clear." He watched his ships adjusting. Watched the Iron Widow adjusting to match. She was reading his formation changes in real time and responding, not with speed, but with placement, positioning herself between the Undying Certainty and one of the flanking cruisers so that any shot at her was also a shot that might thread past her and hit the other ship. The Iron Widow kept firing. The Persuaders, close-range, brutal, relentless, kept hammering at every Veth ship that came within their range, not trying to destroy but to degrade, to strip off sensors and exhaust manifolds and antenna arrays and secondary systems, to blind and slow and complicate every ship they touched. A direct hit took out the Widow's forward observation array. Another stripped a section of already damaged hull, plating from her port side, and the decompression was immediate. Park sealed it in 11 seconds, which was fast, and the crew in that section had already been in suits for 2 hours. Another hit found something structural in the secondary forward beam, and the bridge shook hard enough that Priya was thrown sideways into her console. She caught herself, came back to the screen, blood on her forehead from where she had hit the edge of the display frame. She did not mention it. "Still in it," she said. "Still in it," Yara confirmed. The moment that changed things came at the 41-minute mark of the engagement. One of the flanking Veth cruisers, not the crippled one, the other one, the one that had been trying to get behind the Iron Widow, made an aggressive course correction that brought it into the Widow's path at a closing speed that Torres identified as an attempt to force a near collision. The tactic was sound. At close enough range, the Widow's point defense systems would have to divide their attention, and a collision itself, even a grazing one, at the Widow's current structural integrity level would be potentially catastrophic. The Widow's point defense tracked the cruiser. Torres locked the 2 functional turrets onto its forward section and opened fire. Steady, precise, aimed not at the hull but at the cruiser's own sensor arrays, the targeting eyes that let its weapons find things accurately. At 32,000 kilometers, Torres killed the cruiser's primary targeting array, all of it. Multiple simultaneous hits on the array housing with the accuracy that came from having computed this exact geometry for the last 20 minutes and from being the kind of weapons officer who had been on this ship for 11 years and believed in her work with a completeness that was almost religious. The cruiser's fire became inaccurate. Its weapons were still firing, but they were firing blind. Broad area fire, probability attacks, spraying the space around the Iron Widow in hopes of hitting something without being able to aim at anything specifically. Orith Vaughn saw it happen. He saw the cascading consequences of it. The blind cruiser now a danger to its own fleet if it kept firing. The formation disrupted. The Iron Widow still alive and still inside his perimeter and still doing damage with every minute that passed. He made the calculation he had been avoiding. "Undying Certainty weapons," he said. "Clear fire on the Iron Widow. All batteries." "Commander," the tactical officer said carefully, "there are 2 of our ships in the—" "I know where our ships are," Orith Vaughn said. "Clear fire. Full power now." The Dreadnought's main batteries came to full charge. It took 8 seconds. 8 seconds for the most powerful weapons systems the Veth had ever built to cycle to full readiness. On the Iron Widow's bridge, every sensor the ship still had screamed simultaneously. "Dreadnought main batteries charging," Priya said, and there was something different in her voice at this moment. Not fear exactly, but the recognition of scale, the specific understanding that what was about to be fired at them was not something they could absorb or deflect. Full power. Yara had been waiting for this moment since she mapped the course. It was not a surprise. It was in fact the plan. "Chen," she said. "Ready," Chen said. "Now." What happened next was not something Orith Vaughn's battle database had a reference for. The Iron Widow had emergency burn vents, safety release valves for reactor pressure in catastrophic overload scenarios. They were not weapons. They were the opposite of weapons. They were the system a ship used to bleed excess energy into space rather than let it destroy the ship from inside. They were positioned along the Widow's stern and lower hull sections. What Chen had built with the tuned oscillation system was not exactly a stable reactor. It was a reactor producing above its rated output through a cycling surge process, a process that built pressure with each oscillation. The pressure had nowhere to go because Chen had kept the burn vents closed, had been keeping them closed, building the cycle, building the pressure. 3 Veth ships were currently in a close arc behind and below the Iron Widow, including the Undying Certainty. Chen opened all 6 burn vents simultaneously. What came out was not plasma in the military sense. It was not a directed weapon, was not shaped or aimed in the way weapons are aimed. It was a catastrophic pressure release in 6 directions at once. A bloom of superheated reactor exhaust that expanded outward in a sphere and hit everything within range with the uniform disregard of a natural phenomenon. It was not supposed to be possible to aim an emergency pressure release. You were not supposed to be able to time one. You were not supposed to be able to position your ship so that the geometry of the exhaust bloom intersected with specific targets. Chen had done all 3. The dreadnought Undying Certainty took the full center of the bloom. It had been 8 seconds from battery charge to firing. The bloom was faster than 8 seconds. The dreadnought's main batteries did not fire. For several minutes, everyone on the Iron Widow's bridge was doing something. Reading screens, confirming damage, updating structural assessments, rerouting power through the sections Chen was still managing from below. Then it was quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives after something enormous. Priya looked at her sensor display for a long time, long enough that the silence took shape. "Commander," she said. Yara looked at her. "The dreadnought Undying Certainty is..." She stopped. "Read the numbers again." The numbers had not changed. "It is not on sensors." The bridge absorbed that. "The forward cruiser with the damaged engines is retreating," Priya continued, her voice steady now with the effort of being a voice that relays information accurately. "The blind cruiser is following. The 3rd cruiser is." She checked, also retreating. "All 3 remaining vessels are changing heading, moving away from our position." Silence. Volkov's voice came down from the junction room. Quiet, low, the voice of a man alone with something he had not expected to feel this completely. She did it. Nobody said anything. Yara sat in the command chair and felt the weight of the last 4 hours settle onto her in a way she had kept it from doing while it was still happening. She let it settle, the 48 dead, the alderman, the 61 people in sickbay. The reactor that was now cycling down to a lower, safer output as Chen backed it off from the tuned frequency. The Undying Certainty, which had been the most advanced warship the Veth had ever built, and was now not on sensors. She did not feel triumph. Triumph was a clean emotion, and this was not clean. She felt something more complicated and more true. The specific, exhausted relief of people who have survived something that should have finished them, mixed with the grief that survival always costs. "Get me, Chen," she said. The comm clicked. A pause. "Still here," Chen said. Her voice was very tired. "You did good work," Yara said, a longer pause. "She did the work," Chen said. "I just listened." Yara understood exactly what she meant. "Medical teams to all sections," she said. "Then get me damage assessment. Full ship." She paused. "And someone please clean the blood off the navigation console." The Iron Widow drifted in the dark, surrounded by the retreating signatures of 3 Veth ships that had come here to watch something end, and were now leaving with a story they would spend a long time trying to explain. The coolant ribbon still moved quietly outside, catching starlight. She was not finished. She had never been finished. The 3 Veth ships ran for 9 hours before they stopped. They stopped at the edge of the Meridian system, the territory their fleet commander had named, less than a day ago, as part of his price for the Iron Widow's crew. They stopped there and held position for about 40 minutes, their sensor arrays pointed back the way they had come, and then they moved on. Not toward the Iron Widow, away from it. Away from the coordinates where the Undying Certainty's wreckage was slowly expanding into a debris field that would take years to fully settle. Relay Station Kadir picked up their departure signatures. Station Commander Aditi Nair had not left her screens in 9 hours. When the 3 Veth signatures appeared on her display moving in the wrong direction, not toward the Iron Widow, not toward any human position, just away, she read the numbers 3 times and then put her head down on her console for a moment. Not crying, just breathing. Just needing one moment of something other than composure. Then she sat up and started writing the report to Naval High Command, which was going to be one of the stranger reports she had ever filed. The first line was factual. At 0347 station time, the Veth fleet that had surrounded the Iron Widow at the coordinates attached departed the area. 3 ships. The 4th, the dreadnought Undying Certainty, does not appear on any sensor return. The second line was also factual. The Iron Widow is still present at coordinates attached. She is on reduced power, but her transponder is active, and she is transmitting damage assessment on standard frequency. She stopped after those two lines and sat back and thought about whether a third line was needed or whether those two said everything. They said everything. She sent the report. The news moved fast. Faster than distress signals, faster than military dispatches, faster than the careful, measured communication of official channels. It moved the way things move when they are true and large, and people cannot keep them inside. Person to person, screen to screen, station to station, passed along colony networks and freighter comm relays and the informal communication webs that humans had built across the outer reach over 3 generations of living far from home. The Iron Widow is still alive. That was the core of it. The message stripped to its essential weight. The thing that mattered underneath all the details and numbers and tactical explanations. They demanded we surrender. They stood over the most famous ship we have, and they gave us 6 hours, and they were certain of the answer. The Iron Widow is still alive. On Kareth Station, the man who had stayed at his screen all night sat up from where he had fallen asleep sideways in his chair and read the message and looked at it for a while and then laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that comes from somewhere deep that you did not know needed releasing. In the Meridian system, the system that had been named as part of the Veth's price, the woman who had put her children to bed and sat alone at her screen put her head in her hands and stayed like that for a while. Not from grief, from relief. The distinction was important, and she knew it, and she let herself feel the full, honest reality of it. In 100 colony rooms, in the quiet hours that come before a local day starts, people heard and felt the thing that the numbers described. They had been surrounded, they had been given a deadline, they had been told the fight was over. And then it wasn't. On the Iron Widow, the first 18 hours after the battle had the specific quality of aftermath work. Necessary, unglamorous, steady. Medical Officer Okafor had 41 wounded to continue treating, 2 of whom were in the critical range that required watching every few hours. The battle had added 7 more to the list, none life-threatening but 4, with the kind of damage that needed consistent attention and would cause long recovery times. He moved through sickbay with the worn efficiency of someone who had been on his feet for 14 hours and had learned over a long career. That efficiency was how you kept compassion functional when the caseload was this high. Chen slept for 4 hours in the engineering corridor, on the floor, next to the power relay she had rebuilt. Nobody asked her to move. Volkov placed a jacket over her and went back to the junction room and spent 2 hours quietly running diagnostic checks on the distribution system she had built. Not because he expected to find a problem, but because it felt like the right way to honor the work. The work was sound. He had known it would be. He ran the checks anyway. Park went through the sealed sections with a full damage assessment team, cataloging what could be repaired with available materials and what would need dry dock attention. The answer was that about 60% of the damage was patchable in the short term, enough to make the ship more stable for the journey home, and 40% was going to have to wait for facilities that the Iron Widow would not see for several months. He noted all of this in the damage log with the thoroughness of a man who believed that accurate records were a form of respect for the people whose work they documented. Torres cleaned the weapons consoles, all of them, not just hers. She worked from one end of the tactical station to the other, methodical and quiet. And when she was done, she went to Priya's navigation console and cleaned that too. The blood that had dried there from Priya's forehead cut, which Priya had allowed the medical officer to close with 2 strips of adhesive bandage but had otherwise not paused for. "You don't have to do that," Priya said. "I know," Torres said, and kept cleaning. Yara wrote the casualty report herself. She always did, every name, every rank, every section they had served in. A brief note for each one, not the formal military language of official records, but the kind of note that only a commander who had served with people long enough to know something real about them could write. Not long, not decorated, just specific. The particular things that made each person irreplaceable to the specific community of the Iron Widow, rather than interchangeable with any other soldier. She wrote the Alderman's crew as well. She had not known all of them as well as her own people, but she wrote what she knew, and for the ones she knew less, she wrote the only fact that felt large enough to carry the weight. They moved toward what was coming, not away from it. She sat with the finished report for a while before she transmitted it. Then she wrote a separate message, shorter, personal, not part of the official record, to Station Commander Nair at Kadir Relay. "We heard your message. Thank you. It mattered." Osi, she sent that one first before the official report. Naval High Command received the situation report and the casualty list and the technical documentation of the battle, single-link large transmission package from the Iron Widow, which arrived at 1422 Earth Central Time to a room containing Admiral Chen Wu, 3 senior tactical officers, and 4 analysts who had been running scenarios all night trying to calculate possible outcomes. None of their scenarios had included the emergency pressure release. Admiral Chen Wu read the technical section twice. Then she put the document down and looked at the analysts. "Did any of our models project this?" she asked. No one in the room said yes. She picked the document back up and read the technical section a third time. "Get me Commander Osei on a direct channel when she is available," she said. Then, almost to herself, she used the burn vents. One of the analysts, who was young and could not quite suppress the thing he was feeling, "Is that what it says?" "That is what it says. You can't aim burn vents." The Admiral looked at him with the expression of someone who has just been told a fact they now had direct documentary evidence against. "Apparently," she said carefully, "you can." 42 hours after the battle, the Iron Widow got her thrusters fully back online. It was not a dramatic moment. The thrusters came up in sequence as Chen walked through the restart protocol, and each one registered on the navigation display as a quiet confirmation. And eventually all of them were running, and Priya had a proper course calculated to the nearest repair facility. 9 days, maybe 8 if the drive held steady. Yara sat in the command chair and watched the course appear on the navigation display, and felt the particular quality of an ending that is also a beginning. The moment when a thing that has been acute becomes something you will carry forward. The weight of the last 3 days was not going to reduce. It was going to become part of the ship's history, woven into the record alongside the 7 ships at the Reach of Sorrows and the Meridian Crossing, and the 12 other times someone had tried to end the Iron Widow and been wrong. Priya confirmed the course. Yara approved it. The Iron Widow turned onto her heading. 9 days, Volkov said from the back of the bridge. His splinted arm was still close to his side. He had not, since the battle ended, claimed to be fine. He had simply continued being useful, which was functionally the same thing. 8 if we're lucky, Priya said. "We are," Volkov said, "demonstrably lucky." The Veth High Council received Fleet Commander Orth Vaughn's battle report at roughly the same time as Naval High Command received Yara's. Orth Vaughn had written his report with the scrupulous honesty of a man who understood that the only thing worse than the truth would be a version of it that unraveled later. He described the engagement in full detail. The approach, the formation, the power readings, the decision to engage before the deadline, the Iron Widow's course change, the use of the close-range weapons, the pressure release. He spent particular time on the pressure release. He wanted the Council to understand exactly what had happened, because he suspected that if they did not understand it precisely, they would spend a time constructing an explanation that was more comfortable and less accurate. He ended the report with a section that was very short. The Iron Widow is currently making for a repair facility on reduced power. Her damage is significant, but she is mobile and her crew is functional. The engagement should be considered a decisive human victory. I recommend this assessment be shared with High Council military strategists in full and without modification. He then added one final paragraph, which was not standard in military reports and which he included anyway. "We intercepted their distress signal. We read it as confirmation of total defeat. The signal was accurate. Every damage figure it contained was correct. We drew the wrong conclusion from correct data. We believed that what was broken could not fight. We have fought humans 3 times. I should have known better. The recommendation I make to any commander who faces this species in this condition is simple. Correct data about a human ship's damage tells you what is damaged. It does not tell you what is left." He transmitted the report and went to his quarters and sat very still in the dim light for a long time, doing the particular thing that experienced commanders do after engagements they did not win, not mourning, not recalibrating, but thinking, building the understanding that would inform every decision he made going forward. The Iron Widow had done something he had not believed was possible. She had done it with a damaged hull and half a crew, and an engineer who was 26 years old, and a commander he had never met, and would, he suspected, spend the rest of his career trying to understand. He sat in the dim light and thought about the species that, when you stood over them in their most broken state and gave them a deadline, responded by rebuilding the thing you had broken into something you had not planned for. He thought about that for a very long time. On the 8th day, because Priya had been right about the luck, the Iron Widow came into range of the repair facility at Harrow Station. They were expected. The facility had been monitoring their approach since that they came within sensor range. And by the time the Widow's bow appeared on the station's visible light cameras, there were people watching the feed from 20 stations and colony outposts that had no operational reason to be watching, except that they wanted to see it. She came in slowly, the way she had always moved, with the particular unhurried dignity of something that had earned the right to take its time. The coolant vents were sealed now. The hull damage was visible from outside, the dark scarred patches where weapons fire had stripped the outer plating. The emergency seal patches Park's team had placed over the decompressed sections. She was not a pretty sight. She was not trying to be. She was there. She was upright, and she was there. And she came into the docking approach under her own power, and that was everything. The facility controller handling the approach, a woman named Bautista, who had been running docking operations at Harrow Station for 11 years and had a carefully cultivated professional composure that she was proud of, said later that she had kept it together all the way through the final docking sequence. She had given the approach calls clearly, managed the spacing correctly, done every part of her job exactly the way it was supposed to be done. It was only when the Iron Widow's docking clamps engaged, that specific mechanical final sound of a ship being held safe after a long time in the dark, that Bautista stopped talking for about 4 seconds. Then she cleared her throat and finished the docking confirmation in the standard language and marked the Iron Widow's arrival in the log with the date and time. She made no additional notes in the official log. The log was not the place for what she would have written. Yara Osi was the last one off the ship. That was not unusual. She had always been the last one off. It was one of those practices that did not need to be explained or announced. The crew understood it, the way they understood all the things about her that were consistent and load-bearing. She walked through the sections of the ship while her people were being processed by the facility's medical teams, while the engineering assessors were doing their initial survey, while the work of the aftermath was beginning in all its necessary and practical detail. She walked through the sealed sections Park had closed. She walked through engineering, past the relay housing Chen had rebuilt. She walked through the junction room where Volkov had sat with his broken arm and his relay board. She walked through the weapons deck where Torres had fired blind targeting solutions on a cruiser's sensor array at 32,000 kilometers and been right every time. She walked through the chapel. She sat on the cold metal bench in the amber light for a few minutes. She did not write in the book. She looked at it for a while, the old volume with its decades of entries, all the people who had sat in this specific room before whatever was coming for them. Then she went to the bridge. The bridge was empty. The screens were dark. The command chair sat still and quiet at the center of the room. She took the folded card from her left breast pocket, the one from Station Commander Nair, the one that said, "Earth is listening, all of us," and she placed it on the armrest of the command chair. A small, specific thing in a large room. The kind of detail that does not mean anything to people who do not understand it and means everything to the ones who do. She looked at the forward viewport. Harrow Station's dock lights were outside, orange and steady in the dark. She looked at them for a while. The Iron Widow was home. She was broken in places that would take months to repair. She had buried 48 of her people, and she would carry that forward. She had done something that would be written about and analyzed and argued over in military circles for years. The battle geometry, the pressure release, the specific sequence of decisions that had turned a dying ship's weakness into a trap. But all of that was the outside of it, the exterior. The version that would appear in reports and histories. The inside was simpler. They had stood over the Iron Widow and given her 6 hours and said, "End here." And the Iron Widow had said, as she had always said, in the language she spoke most clearly, "Not yet. Not yet, and not here, and not on your terms." Yara picked up the card from the armrest, folded it back, put it in her pocket, walked off the bridge, the last one off as always. Behind her, the Iron Widow waited in her berth, quiet, scarred, patient, already waiting for the next time. There was always a next time, and she had always been there for it.